friends, welcome to our webinar series, Justice, Love, Humility, Pastoring in a Divided Culture. My name is Lisa Yaboa, and I'm going to be the host for our episode today. If you have missed our other two episodes, you can always find them on demand at amplifymedia.com. Just go to the top of the page to the webinar link, and you will find those videos along with really helpful resources that might help to enliven and enrich your conversation and hopefully the work that you are doing. But today's episode, our last episode in this series, I think is an important one, especially for those of us who work in the life of congregations, because we want to talk about what it looks like to hold ourselves and our churches accountable to the work of justice, which I would say as a pastor is not multiple choice. It's not like, can I opt out of works of righteousness and justice in the world, but also to how we make room for grace in the midst of that accountability. I come out of the Wesleyan tradition, and we have this understanding that grace without accountability is to be irresponsible. And accountability without grace is to be cruel. And as pastors, we are always holding both of those realities and trying to believe that people can be transformed somewhere in the middle. And so today, our beautiful panelists are going to help us work in the lives of our congregations to be those who hold those realities well for the people that we love and also serve. So I want to go ahead and introduce who we have with us today. I am so excited to share this time with Reverend Dr. Jennifer Harvey. She is the author of Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America, and is also a professor at Drake University. Welcome, Jen. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm really thrilled to be here today. I've been working right now these days, both in the sort of immediate with others, where I live in Des Moines, Iowa, trying to support and partner with anti-racist committed white people who are working to support and advocate with Black Lives Matter. And then I've also been thinking about and kind of trying to write through really painful questions around what happens with the white church next, given the role that predominantly white institutions and including white Christians played in enabling the last 5 years. So I've been wrestling hard with this book, Unholy Silences, and trying to think about how we really learn from what has happened the last 5 years and make some profound commitments to do differently going forward.
Jen, thank you so much for being with us. I also want to introduce Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis. She is the senior pastor at Middle Collegiate Church in New York City. It's a church of about 1,300 individuals. It's a welcoming and inclusive community. We probably bumped into each other 2 years ago at the Revolutionary Love Conference. And Jackie, I just say you're one of those people who you hold space well for others. And so we're just grateful to have you with us as well.
Thank you, Lisa. How wonderful it is to be with this august company today. I'm so thankful. I am working on a book too, Jen, and this writing thing worked better before I got back from vacation. Where,
Yes.
the world is on fire, literally, right? The world is on fire. And I think these conversations about race and racial justice are the most critical conversations for the 21st century. So we quote Dr. Jen all the time at Middle Church about how to raise white kids. Ours is a multi-ethnic community where people go past the white church, the Chinese church, to get to the laboratory, I call, where we get to rehearse the reign of God. And when I was a little kid, 8 years old, is when Dr. King was killed. And I think that both traumatized me and activated me. So I want to say, like you say, Lisa, this work of justice and ministry, that is one thing. And the racial healing of this nation is the faithful job. So I'm excited about having a conversation with my colleagues about how we're going to use the fiercest love to heal America.
Reverend Jackie, thank you so much. Our final panelist is Reverend Greg Moore, who is the Executive Director of the New Faith Communities in the North Carolina Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. That's a whole, I had to take a deep breath to say all of that. But this is the thing that I love so much about Greg. Greg and I actually are colleagues. Truly colleagues. We're neighbors. We're CrossFitters together, and we both grew up in the big country of South Carolina. And yes, I said the big country of South Carolina. It's not a state, it's a country. And we both survived. So Greg, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here. And part of my role now is trying to imagine what church can be, and what are the possibilities at hand, and what have we learned? What are we learning? And how do we create new faith communities that can live more fully into what church contains the possibility to be? And so I love the image of a laboratory, and love the image of a God who's always creating, who's never stopped creating, and even incorporates us into that new creation. And so I get to work right now with planters who are trying to do that and are bearing fruit in beautiful ways and failing in heartbreaking ways, and all of it is offered back for the common good. And what a gift to sit in this seat. Now, I'm also a church planter. I planted a church about 10 years ago. And I'm also raising 4 white kids. And so, Dr. Harvey, thank you so much for what you've offered my family in figuring out how to navigate this. I mean, just as a parent, I'm so grateful. And being in a space with Dr. Lewis and Dr. Harvey is just beyond honoring. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you all so very much. We're going to go ahead and launch into our conversation. I think most pastors would agree that standing up for justice or being people who are about justice in the world is not only a part of our calling, it's a part of our DNA as individuals who say that we're followers of Jesus or we're shaped in the likeness of Jesus. But there is oftentimes, especially in the life of the church, a disconnect between recognizing the need to be people about justice and the actual work of justice. Why do you think that there's oftentimes that disconnect?
Well, Jen, do you want to go?
The awkward Zoom gaze,
I'll say this. I'll go, Lisa, just to get us started. I think the disconnect began when Constantine made Christianity the state of Rome. So I don't think it's new.
Yeah.
I think the movement, the movement of the way, the Jesus movement, the likely brown, I'm going to go brown, who knows how brown, Palestinian Jewish rabbi who wasn't trying to start a religion, but was really kind of reforming Judaism or perfecting it for my Methodist friends, right? Perfecting Judaism. But his religion is the first or last. Put the children in the center of us. Of such belong the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is a place where the last get to the foreground. The margin comes to the center. And so what happens when you make the religion of the marginalized the religion of the state? You get state blessing. You get, let's bless this household codes. Let's bless this hierarchy. Let's bless this sexism. Let's bless homophobia. I mean, come on. So we know that we who are trying to still walk in the way of Jesus are resisting empire. And I think that empire is a system that doesn't want to be resisted. And it can show up in they'll stop giving offering, or it can show up in they'll stop coming. It can show up in is there's going to be conflict, and people go into ministry to be loved and liked, and it can feel really difficult to preach the Jesus who conflicts with empire. I think that's our big tension: with a kingdom of the world versus kingdom of our God and of God's Christ. That's the Palm Sunday conflict, and I live it out all the time. What do you all think about that?
And I just think that's so powerfully put. And that question raises for me, my immediate sort of response is well, the reason is because we're human and we're so broken and sinful, right? But then I think okay, and for how many of us, I think this is true, as someone who most of my vocation is in education, actually, I teach in college, is that institutions also tend to kind of have this embeddedness in empire, I think, as Dr. Jackie put it. And so it's humans, even those of us that aspire to justice and aspire to love kindness and walk humbly with our gods, there's something about institutions as they get tangled up with traditions of injustice that gets sort of sediment, sort of settles in. And so institutions are are never in and of themselves love justice, right? And then for me, I think about then what does it mean to say those of us who are Christian, who are aspiring to be about the way, right? But in institutional context in the United States, US American Christianity has always been entangled with colonial settler enslavement, nation state building. And so until we've contended with that, the institution is always, even with lots of good justice loving humans in it, is always going to pull us back into passivity in the wake of that, which is a bit, I think, of this, what this sort of tsunami of violence that we're experiencing right now in the last 5 or 6 years.
I like to say that we as Americans love to ride in the chariot with Pharaoh.
Yeah.
It's like, Pharaoh, give me a ride, you know?
Well, I think the virtue that has been honed is the virtue of charity as opposed to justice.
Amen.
And so when charity is divorced from justice, it becomes a means of further calcifying the empire, because it further calcifies systems of power. I can give charity too. I find my place because I can do it. And we've sanctified that in the church all the way back to Augustine. I think you're right, Dr. Lewis. And that empire's mentality of privileging charity over justice is frankly what we've been formed in. And so, we say that we have a lot of justice loving folks, but I'm not even sure when I say we, I mean the dominant church in the West. I mean that phrase in every full sense of it. The dominant church in the West may not even know the difference between charity and justice. We might need a new formation process for that. Because I do think empire always privileges charity divorced from justice. And that's a dangerous thing.
And calls ourselves good in the process, which further.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. That's how we're good.
Who loves charity.
Yes.
Nice.
It's like charity is a tax.
Nice.
Charity is a tax we pay.
Yes, that's right.
To hold on to our value, to hold on to our empire values. I mean, I'm just putting that together. I hadn't thought about that before, Greg.
Helpful. Dr. Lewis, when you bring up empire, like I do think in the church, it goes back to Augustine and the sacred story that we carry, and that is the Jewish and Christian canons. It goes back to like Genesis, where, empire's temptation is that we can be like God. And that's the original articulation of where we began to miss the image that was like the truth in that is that we bear the image of God. The lie in that is that we can be God. And empire continues to offer us a false divinity, and charity is how we dispense our false divinity.
Oh, that's good, Greg.
Wow.
And the God we wanted to be isn't even the God who revealed, I'm going to say herself just for fun. It isn't even the God who revealed herself to us. It's the God we created for ourselves.
It's in our image. Yes.
So, right. Yeah. So there's a circular thing going on there. Literally, like we walked out of the water and stood up and got in the cave, and it was dark, and we went, I'm scared. And then we created these little totems and gods for ourselves. And the one we create is the one that is our worst self projected out. Yes. Power, dominance, kill the enemy. And our foundational stories, Greg, back to your point about the foundational stories, even the chosenness story.
Right.
Sorry, Jewish friends, but the chosenness story is an empire story. God loves me so much that God wants me to go take that land and kill the people in the land.
Otherwise.
All that stuff has to be like going, how do we reframe that in the eyes of love?
So this was the first question, and y'all, it's like, we're on a jet. This was no helicopter. So why don't we keep taking it up? So, here we are, we're all pastors in our own right. And we're called to lead with honesty, faithfulness, to offer grace around issues like dismantling white supremacy, and immigration and poverty and creation care. But after a year as disruptive, as combative, I think as revelatory as 2020 has been, how do we discern the line between opinion and injustice? Because a lot of people are going to say, well, this is just my opinion, but sometimes, holding space for opinion or when opinion actually creates great harm.
Mm.
How do we discern that line between opinion and injustice?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, Zoom stare,
Yeah.
Zoom stare. I mean, I'll just talk a little bit about where I'm writing, and I do want to just honor Dr. Jen's book as I say
Mhm.
this. I you know, when I was 8 years old and Dr. King got killed, and then like suddenly apocalypse was revealed in these catastrophic violent moments was revealed is our brokenness and our intention, like our fear, right? So if you're like Linda Sarsour says, if your opinion, slams me, I'm paraphrasing her, but if your opinion harms me,
Mhm.
if we interrogate your opinion through the lens of love, let me say that better. If
Mhm.
the world's major religions all say some kind of version of love God, love neighbor, love self, even if they're not theists, it's love neighbor, love self. Don't do to the other you don't want to you. So that's like all of human life, Ubuntu, right? This idea of
Mhm.
I am because you are. If I interrogate my behavior through does it harm you? Does my opinion make you hungry, Lisa?
Mhm.
Does my opinion make you, slammed against a fence and stoned to death? If my opinion means you don't have right over your body, if I interrogate my opinion through the lens of love,
Mhm.
and what would I want to have done to me? I think that's a starting place, and I think
Mhm.
it's a humble starting place,
Mhm.
to create containers where love guides our work.
Yeah. I've got a thought that I want to come back around, but I want to see if Jen or Greg, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Uh, my my imagination for that, I mean, what you're talking about, I understand, is like what is a community holding itself accountable to, and how do we hold each other accountable to how we occupy space together. And within my imagination, because of the practitioner and tradition I come from, like, I don't know how to do that without the sacrament of baptism kind of being the
Mhm.
basis for naming what holds us together, and that covenant that we made at the beginning. And in most baptismal liturgies, there is a rejection and an affirmation. So what are we corporately rejecting? What are we corporately affirming? And those become really great starting points, I think, for the conversation to say, okay, so we're rejecting, evil and injustice and whatever forms they present themselves, right? And we are affirming love in the ways of Jesus, right? And the ways, what that means. So now that doesn't end the conversation, but I think those have to be the places we continually come back to, so that we can name clearly what we're rejecting and what we're affirming, so that we can hold each other accountable to that. Otherwise, many of our colleagues who are trying to make and hold together as much space, they'll say, well, every voice is welcome. And I want to say, really? Like, I don't think every voice is welcome in this space.
Right.
because unless this voice is rejecting injustice and affirming the ways of Jesus, I don't think they've been formed yet
Mhm.
to hold us accountable as a localized community. I wouldn't lay this on the entire world, but I'm saying in our localized communities, being clear about what we're rejecting and what we're affirming as being an entry point into the conversation, is really, I think, important, really critical.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? I love that locality language so much. And I think because I primarily am in teaching spaces, but I sort of come into this sort of from a different angle, but I think it pertains to church communities too, that for me, one of the most critical things for even having a meaningful conversation about the distinction between injustice and opinion
Mhm.
always for me starts with, let's get really clear about the material realities on the ground. What is our local history here? What is the local history of this place? Who is here now? How did they get here? Who was here? Because when I think about gospel principles like love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I hear this sort of need to refract anything else through those frameworks, right? From a sort of following the way kind of perspective as a Christian. And in that context, then if we need to take that to our material realities where we show up in space together, because so often dominant Christian traditions come from a place, like so much of dominant identifications in the United States, like with a abstract, ethereal, completely ahistorical understanding of who we are and how we got here. And many times just doing that, the material reality together, can actually help folks collaboratively and collectively, even folks with lots of different perspectives, begin to recognize the difference between injustice and opinion just by presenting the history on the ground. Or at least we became more able, I think, to talk about accountability and grace because, oh, I need some grace because I actually didn't know this history. Or, oh, I need some accountability because now I'm seeing the history, right? And I think the materiality of our local communities and contexts is really, really critical as we think about this call that we're seeking to live into in these really complicated ways.
That's so cool. Can I just add like a quick story to that? That is so incredibly true. I preached yesterday at a church in South Carolina, which is in it's in a town that has 2 HBCUs in it. And in the 1960s, there was something called the Orangeburg Massacre that happened in Orangeburg, where the Klan, under police protection, brutalized students at the HBCUs. That story, as a historical fact, is not told in the church I preached in yesterday.
Wow.
What?
There it is, right there.
And so we can't until space is made in that communion for that history to be incorporated into the story of who we are in this town. Salvation is still far off. That's right. So a good historian and making space for story to be told as a sacred proclamation and not as a threat is the Christian virtue at hand, I think. Anyway, that's right.
That's great. Can I jump in there for a second, Lisa?
Yes, please do.
So I love what you guys are talking about, both of you, around what is local and on the ground and material and true. And I'm thinking about stories, period, our stories, and I'm going to say our theologies are a story, our whatever we think psychology is a story, history is a story. All of these are stories. Some have more truth in them than others. And, our story, me as the chick who sits at the Dutch Reformed Church in America, hello, as the first Black person.
That's you.
Workout.
Yeah,
That's it for a minute.
you can find social media. We put the picture up of the slaveholder then and me now. We are the world, haha. So, to come clean about that story of, this church that ultimately hires me, but 400 years after it's born, 1628, so more than that, 500 years, finally a Black woman leading, a Black person leading, a person of color leading, period, we have to own the story that we're the same people who did apartheid in South Africa. We are these people. We are the people who we're the ones who took the land from Lenape. We're the ones who made Manhattan our stomping grounds. Not we, I wasn't there. But so to Greg's point and to Jen's point about what's local, I think there's a technology called Future Search where you look at your stories, right, to find out what your history is, and in it you find episodes of here's where though we stole the land, we trained indigenous kids or something, right, and here's where we participated with the Klan and held slaves. All of those truths will set us free. So I'm saying that to get to what about truth and reconciliation? What's America's version of truth telling on ourselves? That this Constitution never was for me, or Jen, or Lisa, and I don't know if you own land, Greg, but it might have been for you. But this nation state is built on a conflagration of theology and politic that was kind of godless. That's our story.
Yes.
That's our shared story.
Yes.
So everything we do to break into that story, local, national, is where the resistance is. It's like the truth that holds us accountable.
And I would say too, Jackie, it was and not only godless, but also claimed itself as God, to go back to your early claim about empire, right? Which makes it even more difficult and urgently compelling for us who claim the gospel or claim to be seeking to walk this way to name it as such, right? Because it was not only godless, but it claimed itself as God, and it's in our institutions
That's
as
right.
such.
That's right.
And that God of empire is relentlessly unforgiving.
Yes.
And so when that's the God your community is built on, you can't make space to tell a story where you need forgiveness.
Oh,
Ooh.
wow.
So the church I just preached in doesn't have an imagination of a God who will allow them to fill their place in the story and find forgiveness and new life. You tell the truth in empire and you get crucified.
That's
And
right.
so these churches built on that God
Mhm.
don't have an imagination or practice to actually engage in true confession, repentance, and forgiveness. That's the pastoral work at hand.
Well, that's right. That's right.
I've been-
Redeeming God is what I want to say.
Yes.
You said.
Yes.
Can we redeem God?
This is it's so interesting that this is where you all have landed, because if you may not have had the opportunity to watch the first episode with Robert Jones and Diana Butler Bass, but just talking about how this myth that we have created is so much more tempting to lean into than the story. Yeah, and you can keep adding layers to a myth that prop up a particular system of oppression, or even prop up a way in which you understand yourself and your social location. But when you tell a real story, that means you have to reckon with both the brilliance and the brutality, the fragility and also the strength. And yeah, so as a pastor, I've come up with this phrase that people are peoply, and in 2020, whoa, people have gotten really peoply. And people don't always agree in group settings. This is what we know. I think Reverend Jackie, you said, a lot of folks go into ministry because they want to be liked, and then you realize the first 3 weeks, people can write some pretty mean things to you in cursive on lovely stationery. We don't always agree, and people also evolve at different places. Their level of transformation and spiritual formation looks different. What advice would you give to church leaders who are pastoring and leading churches with people who strongly disagree on how the church should react to injustice? And that can even be among staff members.
This isn't gonna be wildly unsatisfactory.
You're from South Carolina.
Oh, darn.
We understand that's satisfactory. It's all right.
Because I don't know that there's maybe Dr. Lewis and Dr. Harvey probably have answers, but my questions in that work are really how is the soul of those people who are disagreeing? Like what sort of inner spirituality, what sort of awareness of who they are, what sort of awareness of their context do they have? I think it's really interesting that Howard Thurman and Fred Rogers are both having a minute.
Yeah.
They're both having a minute, and people are kind of hearkening back to their work. I mean, they're both brilliant, right? And they're both brilliant. But what they both were practitioners of the internal life. And what you're talking about is kind of the external manifestation of disagreements and conflict and all that kind of stuff. But we can't address that until we actually, I think, address the internal life of those who are in conflict. And I think those quiet practitioners who help us go deeper and deeper awareness of ourselves and of each other, that's the work that really has to be done in order to work through conflict, I think, in a way that's healthy. And so those are my questions as I'm looking at conflict, particularly like among staff members or church leaders. What are the spiritual practices that they have that are forming a deeper awareness of themselves and their neighbor and God? And what's forming them to come to the conflict in a way through, like Dr. Lewis said, seeing it through a lens of love, as opposed to seeing it through a lens of myself or a lens of threat. Like that lens is cultivated through that internal work, that spirituality, that deep inside work. Wildly dissatisfactory. Sorry, I know.
No, no.
I have a question for you, Greg, if I may, about that.
Sure.
I'm thinking about, because I've been thinking more about the inner life of late, because I tend to be very sort of tactical and like, okay, what's the pragmatic pedagogy here? How do we we need this programmatic offering and this programmatic offering. And just in my own um, deep need to not, in the last 3-4 years of nightmare burnout, I've been finding myself doing more inner life work than I've ever done in my life. But so my question for you, so I love that answer so much, or that response. And I'm wondering though, because like how do you all who are pastors, and so this also may be for you as well, Dr. Lewis, as you invite and facilitate and support folks in thinking about and cultivating inner life in these ways, I come out of very, very conservative white evangelical context where people did that all the time, hours in prayer, and ended up with, from what I would describe as deeply unjustly malformed spiritual practices. And so how do we even think about inner life work? And because I think you're right, and in ways that facilitate a deeper connection with the humanity of the neighbor and the other, and not sort of this sort of pietistic generating more harm kind, because I grew up in that. And I participated in that, when I was in my much younger days. So I don't know. I just, for both of you, I'm just wondering, because I love that. I've been thinking so much about the inner life, but like, are there practices or ways of cultivating, supporting spiritual development relative to the inner life that then enables different ways of being in conflict, but that don't sort of go down this sort of self-righteous pietistic path? And what does that look like?
Right. Yeah, Dr. Lewis, what's that look like?
Okay. Nobody calls me Dr. Lewis except for the first time on a panel. So please call me Jackie.
Great.
Okay.
You got it.
If you want me to call you Reverend Moore, I will, but just Jackie.
I don't. I would. I'm great.
Okay, good. I think it has to be both the inner and the outer put together. I really do, guys. I think you know this, right, Greg? You're not saying that this is what you're describing or prescribing. A person can go way down in their inner spirituality and end up with, I am right. I am right, right? Right, Jen? Like, I am right. I am right in myself. I am white. I am right. I am rich. I am right. I said my prayers. I'm right.
Yeah.
But so in some way, if we think about the inner journey, I love Parker Palmer's Leading from Within. I've got psych degree, guys. That's what my PhD is, in psych and religion. The inner journey and the outer journey, the inner story and the outer story, the me and the thou. It has to be both, or we end up in a place that God's not calling us. I think so. I think that's why we have a community of faith. I think that's why we have small groups and prayer circles and education. And like, I'll tell a quick story. Black Lives Matter. So I'm Black. Okay. So I'm Black leading the multiracial church. Okay. And all of those things, right? Trayvon Martin and Sandy Bland and Michael Brown and all that stuff. And we did, of course we did Black Lives Matter. I'm Black. Some of y'all are Chinese, but I'm Black. Of course we're going to do that. Leaders tell the story that changes the story. I had people going to my board saying, why is Jackie always talking about Black Lives Matter? What about my life? What about the Chinese life? Whatever. Oh my God. And my board said, poor Jackie, she was traumatized by the murder of Dr. King, right? They have this story. Like, no, this is our calling. I remember the day that we went to sing at a Universalist church, and one of my Chinese women who just really was wrestling and didn't get it, in the community, she got it. Like, she didn't get it on the one-on-ones. She didn't get it she didn't get it how many times I could her lunch. But when we got to the place and we were all singing this particular gospel song, Order My Steps, and then she kind of was like looking around the room and said, oh my God, I get it. This is our shared journey to make sure we walk to the place where Black Lives Matter, because they don't. Like, she didn't get it by herself. She got it in the testimony, in the live life, I'm going to say all the time at Middle with everybody, but some of the breaking in of spirit just isn't going to happen by ourselves. So, I, who am an extrovert, who put myself by myself, Jen, to grow my inner life, I say the psychodynamics of faith happen in pluralities.
Yes.
Does that make sense, guys? Like, it's
Yeah.
got
So well said. Well, I think, Jen, what you pointed to was exactly what Jackie's talking about. I mean, what you experienced in that kind of pietistic expression was what corporately you were expecting of each other. In solitude, you were sort of deepening, but it doesn't have to be in the direction that was done. There are other directions to corporately celebrate something else and individually deepen that experience as well.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly right. It's both and. I think, I mean, to tie it back earlier, I think it is corporately celebrating what we like the sacraments. That's just one way of naming it and celebrating it. Corporately celebrating the sacraments, and then individually deepening both your experience of that and your pursuit of that. And it takes both of those things.
I think so. And I think, Jen, Jen, in your context of teaching young adults, like, I'd be so curious about what you think about that. I think one of the things that I'd love to know, one of the things I think that progressive Christians are struggling with right now is we don't ever want to declare ourselves.
Mm.
We don't want to say this is our identity, right? Love wins, choice, whatever, LGBTQ, like whatever it is that we feel is just the gospel good news. Sometimes we don't want to declare ourselves because we don't want anyone to leave the fold or anyone to, right? But to clarify identity, I'm sorry, some parts of Christianity are bold to say this is right and this is wrong.
Right.
And we might disagree with them, but they'll declare it. Don't you feel like young adults would love for us to declare ourselves? Like, here's what's right. Here's what's
Yes.
right and love, right? Like, tell it.
And they're doing it with or without us.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I work with 19, 20-year-olds every day in and day out. And sometimes, so I am ordained, but I mostly spend my time in these spaces. And when I am in spaces where I hear folks understandably lamenting, grieving the shrinkage of the church, I'm like, I can tell you why. These young people tell me every single day.
Right.
And so I do think that's true. Declaring values, like these are our values, which is not the same thing as saying, so these are the values. And because I'm a pastor or because I'm a teacher, because I have to teach whoever comes in my classroom, right? As a teacher, as a pastor, I'm going to meet you where you are with love, but I'm not going to pretend my values aren't my values in the process as I journey with you, and you are invited to journey with me. And then we'll see where we go, and I think there's a piece too. So I'm going to go back to the pragmatic, tactical, and Lisa, your question about how do people do evolve at different rates. I think that one of the things I've learned in teaching, and I sometimes think might be helpful to pastors, is, who are full-time in that space, we do have to think sort of big picture about community. So when I approach a classroom, one of the things I always do is say to the young people I'm working with, look, we are all in these systems that have been working on us intellectually, morally, spiritually, emotionally since birth and before, right? We've inherited legacies, and we've inherited really different legacies depending on our journeys and our racial identities and our gender identities and where we come from. And that doesn't mean there's not things that are true, but it means our capacity and our ability to sort of even hear the same thing when it comes out of someone's mouth is just radically different. And so we've all inherited these systems. We've got to somehow figure out how to learn together, which means sometimes acknowledging that, like, okay, white racial identity, the way it's been formed, means there's a radically different developmental capacity at age 19, typically, than Black racial identity at age 19, the way it's been formed, right? And somehow we've got to sort of negotiate that. And so I think sometimes that in community spaces, recognizing it's not just in one word, it's not just when I preach, but I do need to attend to, like, race has done a thing on all of us. And so we have to invite spaces and create opportunities and build into the life of our communities, targeted, where are the glitch points, where are the gap points, where is there amnesia? And we have to, if we are pastoring a community, create spaces that meet folks where they're at, but not ever giving up what is like the truth of our values as we do that. I can love you and still hold on to my values and walk with you and invite you to walk with me, but I'm not going to not say the truth just because we're on a journey together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that grace and accountability thing Lisa was laying out at the
Mm,
beginning. I mean, the truth of the matter is, my church has, I mean, not, I'm just saying it, I'm not trying to brag about it, but tripled in membership in my time
mm,
Yes.
through the conflict of Black Lives Matter, through, what are we going to do about marriage equality? Because you just keep declaring, keep declaring your value of love. People want to know what you think. So grace is, you don't have to think what I think. Accountability is actually, in some way, to my own self. Am I true to the vows I've taken, um, to what the gospel is for me, to the language we'll use about it? And I think that the church dies when we pretend like we don't know what we think.
Yep.
mm.
Yes.
That false kind of, that's empire too. Like, let's pretend like we don't know. Like, have some conflict, but be honest about what you think and what you feel and what you believe. I think it does clarify.
I I'm going to end or I want to ask one more question, just kind of to close our time. But I want to just say this has been manna. I mean, you all have just offered, I think, great grace to pastors who are probably feeling a little bit pressed. I use this image from one of my professors, living between a demanding God and a complaining people.
Mm.
And so, thank you for offering great grace to them. But can you offer a word of hope for what maybe church? church could look like for those who are trying to hold space for both accountability and grace? Just a vision for what that might look like.
I'm going
And
to
I
tell.
saw a new
Oh,
heaven.
I'll go.
No, go Jen, go.
This is just the only story I'm dwelling with right now in terms of hope, is that these three women, their names were Mary, Mary, and Salome. They were grieving. They were terrified. This guy they'd been hanging out with had been executed by the state. And they were sad. And they walked to a tomb because they were going to tend the body, and they were going to look right in the face. They were going to face it and tend a dead body. They were not, I'm sure they were afraid, but they went anyway to where that death had happened. And then because they went, despite their fear and grief and anticipation of touching death, they were the first ones to experience and see that the order had been overturned and life came out of that tomb. And that is the only story I am dwelling with right now, is, can I walk with those women to the tomb?
Yeah.
Can I walk with them?
There's enough Methodist Pentecostal in me. Yes, Jen.
That's really true. That's right. Feels right. And I'm living with apocalypse, y'all. This is the hottest hot mess time I have ever experienced. Hot mess. Dead black bodies. I will never forget the knee on the neck of George Floyd as long as I live. And when I'm talking to Ruby Sales and she goes, people say we haven't been here before. We've not been precisely here before. Well, we've been close to this place before. And what I know is that in the turning upside down of the universe and the disruption of the universe, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, because the old one had passed away and the new one had come. I'm in Zechariah 8 about the holy city being the place where little kids will be able to shoot some basketball and the old people will be all right, rocking on the porches. I'm about to do a new thing, says the Lord. Can you not perceive it? And I'm not like rapture. I'm not like, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I believe that stuff. But I do believe that there is some way in which humankind is partnering with God now to make a new world, and that we're going to make it out of the ashes. Yeah. And I would like to say to the pastors who are wrestling about holding both grace and accountability in these painful times, to try to be yourself, to try to be authentically yourself and lean on your authentic faith and try to speak the truth every day. And the truth will set us free.
In many ways, it feels like we're just in this extended Lent. Lent has just lasted forever this year. And Jim, what I love about your earlier point about the women going to the tomb, I mean, they're the ones who pastor us throughout Lent, and their journey is this: that they're going to the tomb carrying the things that death demands, and suddenly in the Easter story, those things no longer are needed, and they're given new tools. They're commissioned with new practices to tending to life and not death. And I think for us in this season, this extended Lent, that's the journey we're on. My question for our churches is, what were we doing that was killing us? What are we still doing that is really about tending to death and not life? And can we put that stuff down? And in this new creation, what do we need to take up that is going to be about tending to life and not death? And some of those things might be like putting down the notion that we're going to put on worship as a production to get people to show up to give us money, or that we dispense holy goods, that people need to come and give us money in order to consume. Can we put all that those sort of practices of empire down? Can we name them first? Things we're carrying, maybe even unawares. Can we name them, put them down, and then figuring out what does it take to tend to life in this new season? I think the Lenten journey will serve us in that work.
I want to thank all three of you. You've been the Trinity, the Fellowship of Friends for, I know many pastors who have been watching this series who find themselves in what feels like a wilderness, but you have provided manna, you have provided quail through your words, you provided water, not just because of who you are out of your human capacity, but the ways in which God has spoken in you and through you this day. I'm going to say thank you. I want to say thank you. I also want to thank each and every one of you who've been watching this series and for the conversation you've been having in the midst of this conversation. And I want to thank Amplify Media for sponsoring this series. You can watch all of these episodes on demand at amplifymedia.com. And in just a few moments, you'll get to see a commercial and hear more about the wonderful resources that Amplify Media offers up to pastors and congregations as they are deeply formed and well-formed to be people who hold both onto social holiness and also personal piety in a way that we look and reflect the image of the Most High God. Thank you all again for joining us. And in the words of the Ella Baker song, we who believe in freedom will not rest until it comes. Blessings to you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Amplify is an easy-to-use multimedia platform that will allow your congregation and community to discover, customize, and share diverse resources that encourage deeper discipleship and equip you to pursue your mission with greater impact. Your church can engage with Amplify on one of 3 successive tiers. In the basic tier, your church will have access to thousands of hours of biblically based content that address a vast assortment of topics, and all of your content is available on iOS and Android devices and streams directly on Roku and Fire TV. The whole experience is simple and intuitive, meeting your community where they already are. The premium tier affords all the features of the basic tier, but increases the level of customization. You can show only what's relevant to your church or provide access to it all. The choice is yours. You'll also be able to brand the channel specifically to your church, and you'll have access to live stream services, publish your own resources, and enable other Amplify users to view your custom content. You can even embed portions of the platform onto your church's current website, creating an immersive, comprehensive experience for your church members and visitors. Finally, the custom tier provides all of the technology needed to make Amplify the digital home of your church. Not only will your church be able to apply your brand across the platform itself, but also all apps will be able to be branded as your own. You'll even be able to program your own broadcasting channel, providing your congregation live access to continuous programming. Give us a call today to begin reaching more people in more places with resources that share the love of Jesus and inspire faithful discipleship and service.